My name is Kennedy Dawson. I'm 33 years old, a financial advisor living in Chicago. My life used to be mapped out as clearly as an Excel spreadsheet, logical, orderly, no room for error, until the day I walked into a wedding in Malibu and realized I wasn't a guest. I was the victim. No one turned to look at me. Not a single hello, not one familiar glance. But when the bride walked out, the entire room fell silent. Everything I saw in front of me was identical to what I had once planned for my own wedding. From the music I had chosen, the bouquet, the lights hanging from the ceiling, down to the dress tailored exactly to my measurements. That bride was Natalie, my cousin, and the groom was the man I once loved, the one I had planned to marry. Have you ever felt like you were being ripped out of your own life while standing in the middle of a crowd? When everything you dreamed of, planned for, and loved was stolen by someone else and put on display like it never belonged to you? If this story touched something inside you, leave a comment. Hit like if you've ever been betrayed by family. And if you want to know what really happened after that moment, follow the channel. Because after that, I didn't stay silent. And what I did next, none of them ever saw coming. I opened my email on a Tuesday morning, like I always did. One subject line froze me in place. Natalie and Brandon's wedding. You're cordially invited. The fancy wording hovered over a glowing photo of a Malibu beach, like there was nothing wrong in the world. But the second I read the name Brandon, my chest tightened. Brandon Wells, the man I had once loved deeply, the man I thought I would build a life with. We dated for 2 years quietly, privately. Not because we were ashamed, but because I believed some feelings only needed to be real, not public. When it ended, I didn't blame him. I thought the timing was off. I thought he needed space. I thought too many things. I looked at Natalie's name, my cousin printed at the top of the invitation, and it felt like a block of ice had slid straight into my chest. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year. No fights, just distance. And I never tried to close that gap. She had never mentioned Brandon, not once. And now, they were getting married? I called my mom. She picked up after the second ring. Her voice was steady, nothing unusual, as if a tornado hadn't just torn through my chest from reading that invitation. "Did you get the invite yet?" she asked. "I did," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm not sure I'll go." She paused for a second, then said, "Kennedy, it's family. We're all going. You should be there." "But Mom," I started to say something, but I didn't even know what exactly. That I once loved him? That Natalie knew? That I couldn't pretend I didn't see what I saw? But I was 33, and I understood. There were things my mother would never understand. In the end, I said quietly, "Okay, I'll make arrangements." I booked a flight to Los Angeles and rented a car straight to the beachfront resort in Malibu. It was a lavish, serene place where people paid tens of thousands of dollars for a few dreamy hours together. I arrived late in the afternoon. The golden sunlight stretched over the ocean like honey. I pulled into the parking lot, checked in, and reminded myself to be civil. I hadn't come to cause a scene. I just needed to understand. The welcome party was held by the pool, with wine, paper lanterns strung along the palms, and soft guitar music from a live band. I chose a soda over wine. I didn't trust myself with alcohol that night. Natalie appeared in the crowd like a cover girl stepping out of a bridal magazine's soft curls, an ivory silk dress, a smile that suggested everything in the world always went her way. Brandon stood beside her in a rolled-up white shirt, arm around her waist. They were picture perfect if I had been a stranger. I stayed back, avoiding any familiar faces, but Natalie spotted me first. She walked over, wineglass in hand, her expression caught somewhere between surprise and discomfort. "You came?" She smiled, but her lips twitched a little. "The invitation came straight to my inbox," I said. No smile, no anger, just facts. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said. "You didn't think I'd find out," I corrected. She fell silent. Brandon turned then, meeting my eyes for a moment. There was nothing there. No guilt, no joy, no regret. Just blankness, as if I had never existed. I didn't ask why. Not then. I looked at Natalie and gently asked, "So, when did you two start?" She hesitated. "Well, after you two ended, it's been a while, right?" "Yeah," I nodded. "It's been a while." Then I turned and walked away, letting the sea breeze rush across my shoulders. I didn't cry. I had learned how to stay calm when emotions hit like waves. But I knew something was off, and it wasn't just about two people getting together. The next morning, I woke early and headed to the ceremony area for coffee. That's when I saw the people setting up flowers, laying linens, building the wedding arch, all using the exact color scheme I'd once designed for my own wedding, ivory and deep plum. I watched the lavender and white daisies being arranged, the ribbons lining the aisle, and then the piano music began its soundcheck, the same piece I had once chosen for my own ceremony. I stood there, stunned. No one on the event team recognized me as the original designer. They were just following the bride's family instructions. Back in my room, I opened my laptop. I had saved my wedding drafts in a private folder. That's when I noticed my Dropbox had been accessed. Files downloaded 2 months ago, from an unfamiliar IP. I checked the edit history, and I knew Natalie had copied everything. She hadn't just taken the man I once loved, she had taken the wedding I dreamed of. I don't know what you'd do in a moment like that. Maybe you'd cry, maybe you'd leave, maybe you'd scream. But I sat down, placed my hands on the keyboard, and started a new folder. Not for revenge, but to document, to remember, to prepare for what I knew was only the beginning. I took a seat in the third row, surrounded by guests I barely knew. They chatted politely, champagne glasses in hand, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow on the ivory ribbons swaying gently in the breeze. It was picture perfect, so much so that I had to bite the inside of my hand to stay grounded. The string quartet began to play, not just any piece. The one Brandon and I had picked together, on a quiet Friday afternoon in our little Chicago apartment. I remember crying when I heard the first recording. He told me no one else would ever walk down the aisle to that song but me. And now, it was playing, as he stood at the end of the aisle, eyes forward, waiting for someone who wasn't me. I held my breath. Then the bride appeared. The shock hit like a wave crashing against my chest. That dress. There was no mistaking it. It was the design I had commissioned at a private boutique in Lincoln Park, with a seamstress who measured every inch of my figure. A soft V-neck, deep back, delicate lace sleeves. I had chosen it because it was just revealing enough, yet still elegant. And now, it hugged Natalie's body perfectly. She smiled radiantly, eyes sparkling in the sunset, fingers brushing the white lavender bouquet, the exact combination I had designed myself. I heard someone whisper behind me. Maybe they recognized it. Maybe they didn't. But I saw a few uncertain glances, eyes landing on me before quickly darting away. I stood up abruptly. The wooden chair made a soft but distinct sound. A few people turned to look. I didn't look back. I just stood there in the long stretch of silence, my heart pounding so violently it made my ears ring. I turned and walked away from the row of chairs, heading straight to the back of the wedding venue, my feet sinking into petals and sand, my mind spinning like I was walking inside a dream. I stopped near the entrance to the reception area, placing a light hand on the railing, trying to steady myself. A server came over, his voice gentle. "Are you all right, ma'am? Would you like some water?" I pressed my lips together and gave a slight nod. He handed me a glass of cold water, then quietly stepped away, like he was used to the quiet breakdowns that sometimes came with weddings like this. I raised the glass to my lips, but didn't drink. I just stared out at the ocean. No music played anymore, but the waves became the background rhythm for a truth that was slowly becoming clearer. They hadn't just stolen my wedding ideas. They had stolen my memories. I remembered writing a draft for the MC, a soft, emotional speech, woven with the story of Brandon and me, inside jokes, little details only we would understand. And when the microphone came on, the host began reading each sentence, each line exactly like the version I once stored in my personal Dropbox. I sighed and pulled out my phone, quietly opening the Notes app. I typed fast. Soundtrack identical to the original, MC script copied, wedding dress, bouquet, table layout, light strings, each detail appeared like a slow, sharp knife. Less than an hour after the ceremony, I returned to my room. I didn't eat dinner. I didn't go to the reception. I just sat alone in the dim light of my hotel room, yellow light casting a soft glow on the blank white wall. I opened my laptop and went back to an old folder I had once named Ever After. Inside were all the wedding plans from last year, notes, sketches, budget details. And then I saw the most recent, access log 2 months ago. But it wasn't me. Someone had used another device, logged in at 2 a.m. I opened the IP log. The address traced back to a residential neighborhood in Brentwood. I didn't need to look it up, that was Natalie's house. I typed slowly, creating a new folder. Named it, For the Record. I dragged each photo, each document, every screenshot into it. I didn't need anyone to believe me. Didn't need a witness. But I needed to keep it. For myself. For the clarity they all thought I lacked. The sudden ring of my phone startled me. It was Mom. I let it ring 5 times before answering. "Aren't you coming down for dinner?" she asked, a hint of concern in her voice. "I'm not hungry. Don't you want to talk to everyone? I mean, Natalie is still your cousin. I think maybe you should try to be a little happier." I closed my eyes. That sentence hit like a bucket of cold water. "You know what, Mom?" I said slowly. "She's wearing my dress. Did you notice?" She went quiet. "The music, the flowers, the lighting, the MC, it's all mine." Still no response. "And the groom, do you remember who he once was to me?" A quiet sigh came through the line. "Feelings don't always work out, Kennedy. You know that. Sometimes people just don't match. And life, it takes a different turn." I didn't argue. I just felt a thin, cold sheet of ice spread over my mother's voice, gentle but quietly dividing me from the rest of the family. "So, they took a different turn and used my blueprint to color it," I replied. "You're overreacting." "No, Mom. I'm reacting exactly right." I hung up, calmly. No yelling, no rage. But something inside me had cracked. I sat back on the bed, hands clenched into fists. Not because I was weak, but because I was beginning to see clearly. This wasn't just about heartbreak. This was manipulation. A quiet theft wrapped in the disguise of family. And I couldn't stay silent the way they expected. Not anymore. I still remembered the day Brandon and I officially became a couple. It was during our final year of college, buried under lectures, final projects, and broken sleep in a freezing dorm. We weren't the flashy couple. No big romantic posts, no staged photos on social media. Love between us started with small things: a coffee delivered to the library, a handwritten note tucked inside a book I was reading, a dinner made from whatever scraps were left in our shared student fridge. Brandon was never the expressive type. But with him, I always felt safe. He didn't talk much, but he listened deeply. There was a week I had migraines from thesis stress. He stayed with me every night, didn't leave my side. We didn't have to say "I love you" out loud, we lived it quietly, every day. The cracks began to show that spring. I got an internship at a major investment firm in Chicago. The pressure was brutal: long hours, 0 mistakes allowed. I was wound so tight I barely ate, barely slept, and right in the middle of it, I found out I was pregnant. I still remember sitting on the dorm bathroom floor, test in hand, shaking. I collapsed onto the cold tile. I had imagined hundreds of scenarios for my future, but never this. Not at 22. Not while trying to break into the world of sharp suits and colder hearts. I called Brandon that night. He stayed silent for a long time, so long I thought I'd lost him already. But finally, he said just one thing: "We'll figure it out." We didn't tell anyone except Natalie. Natalie was in college nearby. She and I had been close, like sisters. Every holiday she stayed at my house, slept in my room, shared every secret. When I told her, she didn't look shocked. She hugged me tight, rubbed my back, and said, "Whatever happens, I've got you." But that only lasted a few weeks. I started having terrible cramps, constant fatigue. One morning, I collapsed outside the office. They rushed me to the ER. Brandon arrived within 15 minutes, out of breath, eyes red. But it was too late. I lost the pregnancy. My body gave out. My spirit sank. No one in my family ever knew. I didn't have the strength to tell them. And Brandon, he changed after that. He didn't walk away immediately. But the space between us kept growing. Maybe grief, maybe fear, or maybe he didn't want to stay. I was the one who ended it. It was a stormy afternoon at Union Station. I handed him a short letter, told him we needed space. He didn't argue. He just hugged me tight, then walked away in silence. And Natalie, I never saw her again after that. She went quiet. No texts, no calls. I thought she was giving me space. Now I'm not so sure. Those memories crashed over me like a midnight storm as I sat alone in that hotel room in Malibu, watching Natalie's wedding unfold with every detail, borrowed from my own pain. I wondered, did Natalie ever understand what losing that baby meant to me? Did she realize that stepping away from Brandon wasn't weakness, but the only way I knew how to preserve the last shred of my dignity? Or did she take my silence as an open invitation to quietly step into the place I once held? A part of me still wanted to believe Natalie didn't intend to hurt me, that maybe love came later, that Brandon made the first move, that they thought I no longer cared. But I couldn't ignore the chilling precision in every detail of that wedding. How did Natalie know that exact song? How did she get the wedding dress design that only I and the seamstress knew about? How could the MC's script match word for word the draft I had saved in my private folder? I checked my email. In one of my old inboxes, I had sent those wedding planning files to Brandon, asking for his opinion before we broke up. Among them, one file had been opened by a secondary address, Natalie's backup email. I hadn't noticed it when I hit send, since she had once borrowed my laptop. Back then, I didn't think twice. We were family. I didn't keep boundaries. I didn't use passwords. Maybe that's when my mistake began. I never told anyone about the miscarriage. Not a word. I believed silence was the safest way to protect myself. But maybe that very silence opened the door for others to rewrite my story with their own hands. I looked at myself in the mirror. A 33-year-old woman who once thought she was strong enough to survive anything. But I realized I was only strong as long as no one sifted through my memories, staged them like a play, and began swapping out characters and rewriting lines. I sat back down at my desk and turned on the brighter lamp. My hand trembled slightly as I opened the For the Record folder, but not from pain. This time, it was because I had begun to see the boundary between truth and illusion. It wasn't blurry anymore. I opened a new file and typed the title line, A History of Manipulation, and I began to write, line by line, day by day, memory by memory, not for sympathy, but so I would never forget who I was and who tried to turn me into someone else. I remembered clearly that afternoon Natalie dropped by my apartment in Chicago. It was deep, winter, cold rain, half-melted snow on the streets. She came carrying a tin of cinnamon cookies and a bottle of red wine. Said she just wanted to visit, it's been too long. I never imagined that would be the last time we sat together in the same room where I still believed I was sharing something real with someone who truly cared for me. That day, I was worn out after a brutal week at work. I had been prepping a major presentation for the board, and my head had been spinning all week. I remember sighing with relief when Natalie showed up, all sunshine and lightness as usual. She had a way of walking into a room that made it feel warmer, even in the middle of frigid January. We sat on the floor, opened the wine, snacked on cookies, and chatted about random things. Natalie asked casually about my job, then shifted the conversation to Brandon. I said very little. I didn't want to rehash any of it. She just nodded silently, then suddenly said, I think, if a woman doesn't know how to keep her man, he's going to leave eventually, no matter what she does. I turned and looked at her. That sentence wasn't comfort. It wasn't advice. It was a declaration. "Who are you talking about?" I asked. Natalie gave a faint smile, set her wine glass on the table, and stood up. "I just think smart women should know when to let go. And if you've already let go, maybe you should let someone else hold on, don't you think?" She said it while walking over to where I'd left my laptop open on the couch, right where I'd been working before she arrived. "Do you still have those wedding design files from earlier?" she asked, voice calm like nothing was unusual. "I do, but I haven't looked at them since," I said, a little confused. Natalie sat down and started scrolling. "I'm curious what kind of flowers you picked, what your color theme was. If it were me, I'd go with white and a touch of mint green." I gave a half-hearted smile. "I still prefer deep violet. Muted but elegant." She nodded, eyes glued to the screen. "Where did you save everything?" she asked, voice casual, like it didn't matter. "In a folder called Wedding Planning, it's in my Dropbox," I replied, not thinking. I didn't pay much attention. I stood up to grab more cookies. When I came back, Natalie had closed the laptop and said she needed to head out, had a haircut appointment. I hugged her, walked her to the door, still believing she was the only relative who cared enough to check on me during those draining days. A few weeks later, I received a Dropbox notification to reset my password. I assumed I'd mistyped my login and forgot all about it. Only now do I realize she had gone into that folder, downloaded every design file, budget sheet, decor idea, playlist, even a draft of the handwritten letter I once wrote to Brandon but never sent. And what hurt most wasn't that Natalie had stolen from me. It was that every adult in my family, those who once held my hand when I was little, who rocked me to sleep during storms, who hugged me after childhood scrapes knew, and no one said a thing. I only needed one short conversation with my aunt to know that. The week after the wedding, I visited her as she'd invited. Aunt Ruth, my mother's sister, Natalie's mom, a retired school teacher. She was the one who used to tell me to be kind, to be patient, to put family above all else. We sat in her old kitchen, the scent of baked pastries still hanging in the air. "I want to hear it from you honestly," I said, my voice hoarse. "Did you know what Natalie did?" She didn't look at me, just poured the tea and replied softly, "You already stepped away, Kennedy. I think you're smart enough to know that." "Stepped away? What do you mean?" I leaned forward. "You have everything. A good job, your own home, a career." Natalie didn't. "You once said you weren't moving forward with Brandon. You stayed silent, you let it go. So, letting someone else step in, that's only natural." I sat there frozen. "She took my entire wedding plan," I said, gripping my hands. "But you weren't using it anymore," she said, so softly it sounded guiltless. "You're saying everything I once dreamed of, planned, wrote with my own hands if I stopped mentioning it, anyone could just take it?" "Life doesn't operate on fairness, Kennedy," Aunt Ruth said slowly. "It runs on what people believe is reasonable. And to this family, Natalie deserves a good start." I stared at her for a long time. The woman who taught me my first letters was now teaching me something else entirely. As I stood to leave, she called out, "You can be angry, but don't let it ruin you. Sometimes the wise thing to do is walk away in silence." I didn't respond. But deep down, I knew. My next silence wouldn't be the same as before. Because I was no longer moving forward by accepting things, I would move forward with the truth. With what I had seen, documented, and would never let anyone erase again. I started digging everything back up on a drizzly evening, the warm lights in the apartment just enough to mask the trembling in my hands. I opened my laptop, placed a cup of hot tea beside it like a ritual to stay alert, and began opening folder after folder in the drive that had sat untouched for over a year. I logged into Dropbox, where I had stored all the documents related to my old wedding. I couldn't remember every item or detail, but I remembered the feeling of preparing. Then the excitement, the anticipation, the precision down to every cent. And now, everything lay there, no longer a dream but evidence. Each click to open a file tightened my chest a little. I checked the access log. There was a login that didn't come from my device, originating from an IP address in Santa Monica. The first access date matched exactly the day Natalie had stopped by my place with that bottle of wine and box of cookies. I noted the time, IP address, and list of downloaded files. It felt like retracing the scene of a theft, only I had invited the thief into my home, poured them a drink, and called them family. Then I opened my work email. I used to be a financial advisor at a mid-sized real estate investment firm and had access to a company credit card for reimbursable business-related expenses. I always kept everything clean and cautious, never used it for personal matters. But now, when I reviewed the card activity through the internal expense tracking system, chill ran down my spine. A payment of $7,500 had been made to a Malibu address, a wedding reception venue. Next came $4,200 to a high-end invitation design studio in Pasadena. Then $1,300 at an upscale florist. A deposit of $16,000 to secure hotel accommodations and event planning services. All of it charged within 6 weeks, from the same company credit card under my name. I had never authorized any of those transactions. I pulled up old emails, the payment confirmations had been sent from my own address, but there were details that made me freeze. The digital signature didn't match exactly. The two-factor authentication code had been sent to a different phone number. I opened the account recovery logs, and when I saw that number, I could hardly believe my eyes. The last 3 digits matched the number Natalie used back in college when we signed up for a shared study room service. She didn't just steal my design. She used my name, my account, and my company's system to pay for her own wedding with Brandon. I kept searching through my inbox. At that point, I still couldn't believe Natalie would go that far. But then I saw an email confirmation for a wedding dress order from the boutique where I had once commissioned mine a custom gown made to my exact measurements. The order was under my name, but the shipping address was an apartment in Venice Beach. Who lived there? I searched the old registration records. It belonged to Karen Becker, a former classmate of Natalie's and a freelance stylist. Once again, Natalie used the identity I had built my name to place orders for a dress, invitations, flowers, and to pay for her entire wedding. In total, I recorded 14 transactions, amounting to more than $42,000. I don't know what you would do if you discovered someone you loved had slowly slipped into your shadow, using your name to build their dream. I only know that I sat in silence for hours, watching each invoice appear line by line, not angry, not screaming, but sinking into a kind of cold clarity. I opened a new spreadsheet, created columns for time, transaction, shipping address, associated contact, and attached evidence. I titled the file, Ledger of Reclamation. I printed every receipt, saved every email, took screenshots of each transaction on the screen. Then I messaged the company's head accountant. I need a private meeting to discuss some irregularities in the company card account. I knew this wouldn't be resolved quietly, but I wasn't planning to stay quiet either. Everything Natalie had taken from me, love, memories, dreams I had let her take without protest. But $42,000, legally tied to me, under my financial responsibility involving company assets? No. I couldn't let anyone think I was a fraud. I couldn't let Natalie keep walking as if she hadn't stepped over anyone to get there. I looked at the title line on the spreadsheet and typed a small note at the bottom of the page. Not for revenge, but to remind them I never disappeared. I went to Mr. Frederick Coleman's office on a late Thursday afternoon. The sky was overcast, mist settling over the windows, casting the historic River North district in a gloom that matched the rows of aged oak bookshelves in the office where he had once worked with my father. Mr. Frederick was well into his 70s, with thinning white hair, sharp eyes, and a handshake still firm as ever. To me, he wasn't just my father's longtime lawyer, he was a witness to nearly every turning point in our family's life since my father's passing. "Take a seat, Kennedy," he said gently, his voice warm and calm. I sat down, trying to steady my nerves as he opened a drawer and pulled out a carefully preserved file folder. The papers still carried the faint scent of aged parchment. "You asked about the estate documents from 2015, he said, And I believe it's time you knew everything. I swallowed hard. The day your father passed, our legal team drafted a temporary asset distribution based on the original will. He left a parcel of land in Springfield, a scholarship fund, and shares in the investment trust he had created when you were in high school. I vaguely remembered my father mentioning a fund set aside for my daughter, but I never knew the amount or how it was managed. After the miscarriage, I stopped caring about money. I was just trying to survive. Mr. Frederick opened the folder and slid it toward me. "This is the original version," he said. "And this is the version that was submitted to the probate court in 2016, when your mother and Ruth petitioned for a change in estate supervision." I flipped through both documents, comparing them line by line. The section naming sole beneficiary, Kennedy Dawson, in the original had been altered. The submitted version included a 2-page addendum requesting the authority to reallocate assets, while the heir was under treatment for mild anxiety and depressive disorder following a health-related incident. I stared at that line. My vision blurred. "I was undergoing therapy," I whispered. "Not hospitalized. I never lost legal capacity." "I know," Mr. Frederick said. "But with a psychologist's certification and 2 family members acting as guardians in agreement, the court usually doesn't look too deeply. At the time, your mother and Ruth requested temporary financial oversight to ensure stability, but never returned control afterward." "And I was never notified?" Mr. Frederick let out a sigh. "I did send a copy of the notice to your old address in Evanston, but afterward, the asset records were transferred to them. At the time, you had just taken 2 months off school due to health issues. Then you changed jobs. Everything was a bit chaotic. You might not have noticed." I leaned back into the chair, feeling like layers of me were slowly being scraped away. "How much was the total value of the estate back then?" I asked, my voice no longer shaky, only tightly restrained. "Close to $600,000, he said, "including shares, real estate, and portfolio investments." I closed my eyes. $600,000, an amount my father had spent nearly his entire life saving, with the sole purpose of making sure I had a strong foundation so I'd never have to bow my head to anyone. And yet they, my mother and Ruth, had quietly used what they called protective authority to shift it all into their own hands. "Can I still get it back?" I asked. Mr. Frederick nodded slowly. "If you have evidence that the transfer was done without transparency, or that they exploited your mental state to seize control, you can file a civil suit, but you'll need to prove 2 things. 1, that you were fully competent at the time, and 2, that the assets were misused afterward against the original intent." I nodded. "I have a formal diagnosis from a licensed physician confirming I was never incapacitated," I said. "And I've just documented over $42,000 in charges made on a company credit card under my name for Natalie's wedding. She's the one who ended up with the assets you were meant to receive." "Mr. Frederick murmured. I pressed my lips together. "And Ruth, she was the one who co-signed the authority over the estate." I knew I was stepping into dangerous territory, not because I didn't have the right, but because I was about to break apart a carefully constructed illusion of a loving, respectable family built not on trust, but on legal loopholes, silent manipulation, and binding contracts. I thanked Mr. Frederick and held the folder tightly in my arms, as if I were reclaiming years of my life that had been taken without me, even realizing it. When I stepped outside, the fog still hadn't cleared. But inside me, a slow flame had begun to burn. Not a wildfire, but no longer something I would leave smoldering in silence. Because for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. I had proof. I had rights. And I had a reason to follow this truth through to the very end. I sat outside a small cafe tucked behind the historic Riverside quarter of Chicago, a place where I had once met Brandon during the early days of our relationship. Today, the sky was overcast, and a cold wind swept through the amber oaks. I chose a table in the corner, my back to the door, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea to stop them from trembling. I had arrived nearly 30 minutes early, not out of anxiety, but because I needed space to gather my thoughts. Brandon arrived on the dot. Tall, lean, wearing a simple button-down shirt, his familiar face now carried a note of caution in his eyes. He stepped inside, scanning the room before spotting me. Our eyes met. He hesitated, then walked over, his stride unsure. "Hi, Kennedy. Have a seat," I said, my hands still resting quietly on the teacup. He sat across from me. I watched him glance around the cafe, like he was checking to make sure no one he knew was there. I had picked this spot for that reason, discreet, private enough not to draw attention, but not so quiet that it would make him nervous. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Brandon said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond right away. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and set it on the table. I switched on the voice recorder. He saw it but didn't object. He just took a deep breath. "I'm going to ask you directly," I said. "Why?" Brandon stayed quiet for a moment, then looked up at me. "I don't even know where to begin. How about starting from the moment you let Natalie wear my wedding dress?" I said, trying to keep my voice even. Brandon frowned, dropping his gaze. By then, things had already gone too far. "I need the truth, not vague regrets. I have every receipt, every statement. I know Natalie used my name to charge expenses on my company card. I know she pulled the design files from my Dropbox. I know my family orchestrated the asset transfer after my father died. I need to know your part in all of this." Brandon looked at me for a long time, long enough that the air around us seemed to grow heavier. "My father went bankrupt in 2018, he said slowly. "His construction firm defaulted on a major loan. We thought we were going to lose everything. It was Frank Becker, Natalie's father, who stepped in and provided financial backing." I didn't interrupt. "He made a deal," Brandon continued. "Financial support, in exchange for a long-term alliance between the families." I heard the phrase clearly. Not love, not personal. Choice. An alliance. A debt settled through marriage. I didn't agree to it right away. He went on. I still thought about you. I came to find you twice. But Natalie was always there. Always saying you didn't want to see anyone. That you had moved on. That you were doing well. She sent me photos of you at work. Said you'd gotten promoted. That you were happy. And little by little, I stopped trying. "So you agreed to marry the woman who took everything from me?" "I didn't know all of what she had done," he said quickly. "I didn't know about the invitations, or the dress, or the music. I thought it was all hers. Everything was handled by her side of the family. I just followed along. You just follow people, Brandon, even when they take what doesn't belong to them." "I'm not proud of it," he admitted. "But I was scared. My family needed help. And after my father passed last year, I didn't see another way." I looked at him for a long time, not with rage, just sadness. "Did you know Natalie used my company credit card for all of it?" He nodded faintly. "I knew about a few charges. After the wedding, I saw your name on the hotel invoice. I asked her, and she said it was money you had left behind and weren't going to use." "Left behind?" I nearly laughed. Did I leave it? Or did they take it? I pulled out a sheet of paper from my bag and slid it across the table to him. Detailed breakdown. $42,564. All mine. Under my name. Charged through the company system where I worked. "If there's ever an investigation, I'll be the first one called in." Brandon went pale. "I don't want to take this too far," I said. "But I can't stand still anymore. I'll be working with a lawyer. I'm going to protect my name, my dignity, my property." He nodded slowly. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "But if there's anything I can do to help." I looked at him, my eyes no longer filled with anger, just a hollow kind of disappointment. "You can start by telling the truth if you're called as a witness. No hiding, no dodging, no doing it for anyone else but yourself." Brandon nodded again. "I will." I switched off the recorder, slipped my phone into my pocket, and stood up. He stood as well, but I didn't shake his hand, didn't hug him, didn't say goodbye. I just said, "This time, Brandon, I won't let anyone rewrite my story. Not even you." Then I left the cafe, stepping straight into the thickening afternoon fog. Every step I took was steady, unshaken, without a single glance back. For the first time in years, I felt like I had reclaimed the voice they once told me to keep quiet, and I knew this journey was just beginning. I stayed up for nearly 2 nights to finalize everything for my personal blog. Not because I lacked information, but because I needed every word to be accurate, every image to be convincing, every timestamp to be clear and undeniable. I named the blog The Wedding That Wasn't Mine. Simple, not dramatic, not a cry for revenge. Just a cold statement of the truth I'd been holding on to for months. The first post I uploaded was a photo, a white lace-trimmed wedding dress, hanging quietly in the fitting room of Mayfair Bridal in Chicago. Right below it, I added a screenshot from Natalie's wedding video. She was wearing that very same dress, not a single detail changed. I wrote, "I had this dress custom-made last October. I measured every inch, selected every piece of lace. But I never got to wear it, because I never got the chance. The wedding was stolen from the concept to the finances and the memories too." Next, I uploaded photos of corporate credit card statements, email confirmations for wedding services booked under my name, but delivered to Natalie's address, transaction records sent to the Invitation Design Studio in Pasadena, and most notably, a photo of a handwritten letter from Brandon, where he admitted he was pressured by my family to marry Natalie as repayment for a private financial debt between the two families. Each image had captions, timestamps, verifiable links. No exaggerations, no distortions. No one could say I was making it up, and I left the comments section open. In less than 36 hours, the post was shared nearly 3,000 times. The first comments came from people I didn't even know. I've had relatives borrow my name in financial dealings too. "You're incredibly brave. Most of us stay quiet. Thank you for speaking up. Can't believe family would do this. They deserve to be called out." A day later, the blog made it into the trending news column of a local feature. The stolen wedding dress and the shocking accusation from a bride erased from her own life. My name appeared in the subheadline. A photo of Amy in a gray coat standing in front of an old building in Chicago, taken from my LinkedIn profile, was used. I figured someone in the media had traced it. They always find what they need. That afternoon, I received an official email from the legal office representing the Becker family, my mother's side, Natalie's side. The message was brief. "We request that Kennedy Dawson immediately cease all publication of defamatory, slanderous, and reputation-damaging content related to our family. Failure to do so will result in legal action being pursued by the plaintiffs." I just smiled. Because I had everything I needed. I sent a response through my own attorney, Mr. Melvin Chase, a man who had worked with my company in prior internal disputes. I trusted that he wasn't someone easily swayed by influential names. My reply included a file over 40 pages thick, titled Counterclaim, Kennedy Dawson versus Natalie Becker, an involved parties list of accusations. Identity theft. Natalie used my personal information to register wedding services, made payments using my business credit card, and committed electronic fraud. Financial fraud. Transactions exceeding approved limits were carried out without my consent, causing potential losses to both myself and the company I worked for. Document forgery. The service agreement for wedding planning, signed under my name, was confirmed to have a forged signature by legal verification. Breach of trust. Natalie accessed my private Dropbox account without permission, extracting wedding design data that was my intellectual property and personal preparation. Misappropriation of personal assets, including design files, copyrighted wedding visuals, and funds withdrawn from my account for an event held under her name. I attached the recording of my conversation with Brandon, scanned copies of my original signatures, Dropbox access logs, IP history, and a formal complaint from my company's finance department. Every detail was notarized. Natalie's lawyer responded 3 days later. His tone was noticeably softer. My client is deeply distressed by the public shaming of her family on social media and wishes to resolve the matter through reconciliation. I didn't back down. My family isn't being shamed. They're being named for what they did, I said at our first mediation meeting. Natalie didn't show up, but Aunt Ruth did, along with my mother and two representing attorneys. Ruth remained composed, while my mother looked at me like she didn't recognize her own daughter. I sat up straight, hands on the documents, gaze unwavering. "What do you want?" my mother asked, finally breaking the silence. I looked her right in the eye. "I want to be acknowledged as the sole person my father chose. I want his estate returned to the rightful heir. I want my name cleared legally and socially. And I want those who manipulated me, whether through family ties or emotional leverage, to be held accountable." No one responded. They didn't think I'd go through with it. They thought I'd wear out, feel ashamed, and quietly back down. But they were wrong. I stood, closed the file, turned to my lawyer, and said, "Let's begin filing the lawsuit." It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. And I wasn't saying it for them. I was saying it for myself to confirm that I would see it through. The official hearing was set for a Monday morning in early October at the county courthouse in downtown Chicago. I arrived early, wearing a light gray suit, neat and modest. Not to impress anyone, but to remind myself that I was no longer the daughter dismissed, no longer the bride erased from her own wedding, but a citizen with the right to speak and defend the truth. The courtroom was wide, with long wooden benches and sunlight streaming through tall windows, dividing the air in two: half the coldness of law, half the weight of personal emotion. The Becker family sat across from me. Aunt Ruth looked unbothered, like this was just another boardroom meeting. My mother avoided eye contact altogether. And Natalie sat silently, without her usual bold makeup. She looked worn down, almost fading into the glamorous image she had once worked so hard to build. When the judge called my name and asked me to present my case, I stood, took a deep breath. My voice did not shake. I had been preparing for this moment my whole life. "My name is Kennedy Dawson. I stand here, not to humiliate anyone, and not out of anger. I am here to present facts supported by documents, recordings, and witnesses about how my assets, my name, and a part of my life were taken by the very people who called themselves my family." I opened the first folder and handed it to the court clerk. "This is the original will contract prepared by my father, Mr. Charles Dawson, signed by his personal attorney, Mr. Frederick Coleman, and notarized 3 days before his sudden passing. In it, the company assets, the majority shareholding, and investment decision rights are clearly stated to be passed to me, Kennedy Dawson." I paused briefly, glancing toward my mother and Aunt Ruth. They still wouldn't look at me. However, this document was later replaced by a revised version, stating that I voluntarily relinquished my inheritance and granted full power of attorney to my legal guardians, my mother, Mrs. Linda Dawson, and her sister, Mrs. Ruth Becker. That version was signed and notarized while I was undergoing recovery after a miscarriage, during a time when my mental state was unstable. I have no memory of signing it. I opened the next set of documents. This is a signature analysis conducted by the City Police Department's forensic expert. The conclusion: the signature on the second document does not match any of my verified signatures from the past 10 years of financial and legal records. No one said a word. The judge gave a small nod, allowing me to continue. I moved on to the second piece of evidence, a recording of my conversation with Brandon. I would like to submit this audio recording as part of the witness testimony. In this recording, Mr. Brandon Kavanaugh acknowledges the previous personal relationship between him and me, admits that our relationship was never formally ended, and that the wedding with Natalie occurred under pressure from my family due to a prior financial debt between the two parties. The judge approved the recording to be played in court. As Brandon's familiar voice echoed across the room, silence fell like a curtain. I didn't think it would go this far. I owed Natalie's father a sum. My business was basically bankrupt. They said, if I agreed to the wedding, everything would be taken care of. And Natalie, She already had everything planned, the wedding, the dress, the music. I figured it was all hers. I glanced at Brandon. His head was bowed low, unable to meet anyone's eyes. After that, I presented wedding service invoices signed under a forged version of my name, using the corporate credit card from my employer. I pointed out that the Kennedy Dawson signature wasn't mine, and that the transactions were executed by Natalie using a fake email address in my name. Only the domain was .net instead of .com. Finally, I called a special witness, Mrs. Margot, the owner of Mayfair Bridal. She was an older woman with silver hair and a gentle but firm voice. She stood on the witness stand, looking at me with the eyes of someone who saw not a plaintiff, but a daughter who had just found her voice again. Yes, I'm the one who measured Miss Kennedy's wedding dress around last October. We recorded all her measurements because it was a custom design, very detailed. Later, another girl came in claiming to be Kennedy, but her measurements didn't match at all. When I asked, she said she'd lost weight quickly. But in truth, I was pressured to alter the dress. I still have the original alteration note. It says, "Rush job, no questions." The opposing attorney objected, arguing that her statement lacked legal weight, but the judge accepted Mrs. Margot's shop records as supplementary evidence. The final segment of the morning hearing came from a representative of the county tax office. We've identified suspicious internal fund transfers from Mrs. Linda Dawson's corporate account to various linked accounts, including one credit card under the name Kennedy Dawson. These transactions span the past 3 years and total over $270,000. The case is being referred to federal criminal investigators. The entire courtroom fell into stunned silence. The judge struck the gavel and delivered a preliminary ruling. The jury recommends transferring the case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges, including financial fraud, document forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, and misappropriation of assets. As for the civil suit, this court will proceed in a separate session to determine damages and responsibility for restitution. Ruth could no longer maintain her calm. She shot to her feet and yelled, "This is a misunderstanding. We only wanted what was best for her. The girl's unstable. We were trying to protect this family's name." My mother remained seated. One hand clenched her purse tightly, her eyes fixed on the courtroom floor like she was trying to disappear. I didn't look away. I stood tall, feeling my feet grounded firmly on the wooden floor of that courtroom. Everything that once felt impossible had finally taken shape. No more whispers buried inside, no more denial. I left Chicago on an early spring morning, the city still shrouded in the last cold fog of the season, but within me, a new season had begun. No farewell party, no press statement, no grand goodbye. I packed my things, returned the keys to the office that had once been my mother's pride, and quietly booked a one-way ticket to Seattle. Seattle wasn't my hometown, but it held warm childhood memories with my father. Short business trips, quiet cafe mornings by the lake, listening to him talk about law, professional ethics, and the difference between being right and being righteous. I didn't fully understand it then. But now, those words follow me like a quiet vow for the rest of my life. I rented a small wooden house near Lake Union, peaceful and far enough from the noise of my old life. I spent the next 6 months relearning myself, not through books, but through the voices of other women. I visited community centers, met with independent legal experts, women's rights advocates, and child protection organizations. I sat for hours listening to a woman recall being forced to sign a mortgage in her husband's name. I held hands with an elderly lady whose will had been secretly altered by her own grandchildren. I realized there were many other Kennedys out there. Not all of them lost weddings, but all of them had lost their voice. And that's how Second Draft was born. The name came to me on a rainy night while I was rereading the wedding plan Natalie had copied from me. I thought, if life is a manuscript, then everyone deserves the chance to rewrite it one more time for themselves. Second Draft became a nonprofit, funded by community grants and supported by volunteer lawyers, psychologists, and accountants. We didn't take every case, we went deep into neighborhoods, small groups among immigrant families, divorced women, single mothers under financial control. We taught them how to read bank statements, how to understand contracts, how to recognize identity theft. But more importantly, we sat with them as women without judgment. Brandon's letter arrived during the first summer of Second Draft's operations. It was a thick envelope, handwritten in the same script I knew well. Inside was a 4-page apology. He wrote about shame, weakness, and the fear of being seen as a failure by his family. He admitted he had always known Natalie wasn't the right choice, but felt it was too late to turn back. He enclosed transfer documents for all assets tied to me, including the old house purchased using funds from Natalie's father's trust, and a note, "If you can, let me try again." With honesty. I read the letter once, filed it away in a drawer, never replied. Some things, once broken, can be mended, but others are better left with the cracks as reminders. That fall, I was invited to speak at the annual Women and Justice Symposium at the University of Washington. I was going to decline. I'm not a speaker. I don't like standing in front of crowds. But then I thought of the women I'd sat beside whose hands I held who cried when they first held a property deed with their name on it. I stepped, on stage in a simple ivory dress, hair pinned neatly, no sparkling jewelry. The hall held nearly 300 people, all ages, all colors. The spotlight hit me no longer wedding lights, no longer a stage prepared for someone else. This light was truth. "My name is Kennedy Dawson," I began, my voice soft but steady. "I used to be a girl who believed love was enough to protect me from manipulation, that family was always the safest place, and that if I just lived a good life, everything would fall into place." The auditorium was completely still. But I was wrong. I spoke about a wedding that never happened. About a wedding gown whose measurements were altered. About the $42,000 I had to repay for things I never used. About an inheritance contract that was altered while I was in psychiatric recovery. About a mother who chose silence, an aunt who chose control, and a man who once claimed to love me, who chose debt over truth. I didn't shed a tear. "I'm not standing here today to talk about pain," I said. "I'm here to say this. Anyone in this room, no matter what they've lost, has the right to rewrite their story." I paused and took a deep breath. Second Draft isn't a place to start over. It's a place to acknowledge that the past happened and that we can still move forward, more grounded, more aware, and more empowered. Before I stepped down, a woman stood up from the last row. She didn't speak. She simply placed her hand on her chest and nodded. Her eyes held something I thought I might never find again, unspoken understanding. As I walked off the stage that day, sunlight poured through the large glass windows lining the hallway. A young student came up to me and handed me a small piece of paper with a handwritten note. "I'm rewriting my own draft, too. Thank you for giving me the courage." I held that note tightly in my hand, then looked up at the sky outside, where the sun was, slowly setting behind distant snow-capped mountains. And I thought, I didn't lose my wedding. I reclaimed myself. My story could have ended there, but I know somewhere out there, many are still living in silence, in sacrifices taken for granted, in relationships where trust is traded for control and silence. I don't share my experience to place blame, but to pose one question to all of us. If it were you, would you choose silence? Or would you stand up and reclaim your voice? Have you ever felt like you were written out of your own story? Been the one planning, sacrificing, loving, only to be replaced without explanation? If so, I'd love to hear how this story made you feel. I invite you to share your thoughts, your perspective, your experiences, even your long-held pain, because sometimes one story told at the right time is all it takes for someone to begin rewriting their own. If my story touched a corner of your heart, don't hesitate to follow this channel. There are so many more real stories waiting to be shared. Stories of family, of hurt, of betrayal, but also of strength, healing, and courage. Let's walk this journey together, not just to listen, but to understand, to feel, and to make sure none of us has to go through these silent years alone ever again.